Assalamu alaikum. Welcome for today's class. We are going to have the same lesson that we have been discussing last week. This is my second class for this lesson. Uh, it is The Age of Napoleon, chapter number 6, lesson, section number 4. You can find it in your textbook page number 230 to 238. We will continue from the same point where we left the topic last week. So let's move on to our first slide straight away. All know that the objective of the lesson is that you must be able to know or understand how the Napoleon had rose to power and how he fell, why the French supported him, how did Napoleon build an empire, what challenges his empire faced, and what were the events that eventually led to his downfall, and how the Congress of Vienna they tried to create a lasting peace. So we left the topic last week that how France was trying to expand itself into the region. They were trying to bring other nations under their control or influence, but Britain was the only country that remained out of the French control. Uh, they tried to defeat them through wars and invasions, but France was unable to defeat Britain, and Britain was able to defend itself due to its superior navy. They defeated the French at the Battle of Trafalgar near the Spain. When once the uh, re Napoleon realized that he cannot defeat Britain in terms of military means, then he turned his attention on economy. He started to use continental system of trade to close the British trade in Europe. Ultimately, his plan was to bring British economy to collapse and bring Britain to its knees, but still Britain survived actually. So this is the point where we left last week. Let's turn now to on the next slide that what it is all about, how things started to open up for Napoleon. So the French expansion into the region had many consequences. Some countries in Europe they were allied with France, but many of the countries they saw France and Napoleon as an oppressors, as an aggressor, as an invading force. So they resisted actually. For example, in Spain, people resisted the reforms introduced by Napoleon and his brother. These reforms they were against these reforms because they undermined the king's power and the Catholic Church. By this way, they were resisting against the French policies. Similarly, nationalism in other countries that were under French control, the nationalism fueled the feelings of resistance, and the resistance forces turned into guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is a kind of warfare which says that the soldiers are the fighters, they attack and escape. They don't fight an open war over a long period of time. They just attack and escape away. So people in the occupied territories they started guerrilla warfare to resist against the French expansion. In 1812, Napoleon committed a historic blunder, and that blunder costed him his entire political and his entire military career. It was the start of his downfall. The blunder was that Napoleon attacked or invaded Russia. It was a big country. A country like France, which was much smaller in size, could not maintain its grip and control over such a big country. And the soldiers of France were not aware or not known to Russia's climatic conditions. Uh, that's why when they attacked, the result was a complete failure, and it was the start of a new chapter in the political situation of Europe. Tsar Alexander I was once the ally of Napoleon. They together were planning to divide up Europe between them, but ultimately the differences about the continental system led them to separate, and ultimately Napoleon planned to wage a war which actually uh, resulted in a great miscalculation. How they defeated was that when Russian army was retreating, they destroyed everything, they burned everything from the area where they were leaving, which made it very much impossible for the invading French army to survive because they had nothing to get benefit, they had nothing to eat, and there were no shelters, and the worst upon it that the Russian winter came to the rescue, and as a result French army had to retreat back. When they were retreating, Russian soldiers, Russian guerrilla forces, they attacked them from sides. As a result, they in a hassle they run away, and when they reached back to France, they were around 20,000 people as compared to 600,000 people when they started the attack. This defeat actually allowed Russia, Britain, Prussia, and Austria to make an alliance among themselves in order to counter French invasion together. So this was the start of a new chapter. Following the defeat in Russian invasions, now French forces were defeated by the Alliance forces in the Battle of Nations in 1813. This victory actually was in revenge for Napoleon's previous battles, like the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, where joint forces of Russia and Austria were defeated badly. Then 1809, Napoleon was victorious at the Battle of Wagram against the Austria, in which Austria not only lost the territory but also around 3 million people. So this victory actually gave them revenge in 1813. Following this, Napoleon abdicated from the power in 1814, and the power was shifted to Louis XVIII, who was the brother of Louis XVI, and by this way the monarchy was restored. But the restoration of monarchy to the old royal family actually created a fear among the people of France that the old regime will come back to power and it will be returned from the revolution and back to the old days. As a result, when Napoleon came back from exile, actually, he got full support of the French people who were uh, fearing that the revival of old monarchy will bring trouble. So they rallied behind Napoleon, and Napoleon once again took the control of power and became the king. But this rise of sun was limited only for 100 days, and he was once again defeated into the Battle of Waterloo. So let's move on to the next slide. Let's see what happened there. Within a short time, Napoleon escaped from the island of Elba and came back to Paris in March 1815, took control of the power, and King Louis XVIII he fled away. But Napoleon, taking control of power, could not enjoy this time for long. Only for 100 days he was the king. Then in 1815, the joint forces of Britain and Prussia, they gave Napoleon and his forces a crushing defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium, where as a result of this defeat, Napoleon was forced a second time and final time to abdicate from the power and was sent as a prisoner in Saint Helena, a faraway island from France, where he remained there until the end of his life in 1821. The removal of Napoleon from power and his defeat at the battle actually resulted in the end of the French Revolution, particularly the fourth stage. But his legacy continued to affect not only France but even other countries around the world. Within France, we can see that the Napoleonic Code, the right of votes that he extended to the other citizens, and the rights of property and education that he extended to his citizens are still there as a foundation to the French regulations in the country. And abroad, the things that still remind us about Napoleon is that he made a failed attempt to bring Europe into a French empire. He fueled up the nationalism around in Europe and other communities, and they also felt a kind of feeling that they should be ruled by their own people because they have their own identity. He created the Duchy of Warsaw, which ultimately resulted in the creation of modern day Germany. One of the most important thing that he did was the that he sold the Louisiana Territory to America, which was a great tactical move. Basically, this territory was in the control of Spain. He took it from Spain and then sold it to America because he knew that ultimately this territory will be taken away by Americans. So instead of just giving it away, let's have at least some earning from it. So as a cunning move, as a diplomatic move, he took it from he took it from Spain, and then he sold this territory to America. Louisiana Territory actually doubled the size of America, and this move actually paved the way for a stronger French-American relationship. Moving on to the next slide. After the Battle of Waterloo, actually, European diplomats they set up at the Congress of Vienna. They started to redraw the map of Europe. They restored the old monarchies. This was the right of legitimacy that they recognized. Their chief goal was to bring the lasting peace into Europe and finish the uh, prolonged wars to avoid the future conflicts. Their main purpose was to maintain balance of power so that no country is too strong in the region to disturb the peace, and no country is too weak to be a victim. They also restored or they protected they legalized the old monarchies that were once ruling the countries. So those that were uprooted, they brought them back and legalized them. And they also forced the French to not to expand in the region. So ultimately, their main goal was to prevent the French expansion, even after the removal of Napoleon Bonaparte from the scene of power. This you can see that how the map of Germany was created later on. This was the German Confederation, which ultimately turned into modern day Germany. Basically, this was around 360 small states which make up modern day Germany. And Germany got unified in 1871. So the architects of the peace basically promoted the principle of legitimacy, the legal rights, and they restored all the monarchies that were removed throughout the Europe. For example, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain, they formed quadruple alliance to protect the new order, to maintain peace, and to maintain balance of power in the region. So these four nations were emerging power, particularly Prussia, which later on uh, emerged as modern-day Germany. These powers they committed to act together to follow the common policies, to maintain balance of power, and to suppress the revolutionary uprising because they were afraid of a French Revolution that has jolted the basic foundations of Royal Europe and the elite European families, because the French Revolution brought the idea of equality and liberty of all the people, and this was a counter force to the established order of royal power in all countries of the Europe. The conference actually created the concept of Europe. The purpose of this meeting was that the European powers will meet periodically, off and on, to discuss the problems that are facing to their nations and that are key to bring peace to Europe. You can say that this concept of Europe is modern day European Union, which has extended its domain from politics to economy. Uh, the purpose of this creation was to bring lasting peace, which ultimately successfully maintained the peace for another 100 years. But basically, they could not see that French Revolution has put the seeds of nationalism throughout the Europe and the world, and ultimately the future revolution in America and in other parts of the Europe, their roots are basically linked with the French Revolution, which says that every nation is every individual is free and has the same rights like any other individual. So basically, this idea of rights of individual fueled up revolutions around the world. So that is the end of the lesson. I hope it will help you to understand the topic, that how French Revolution unfolded, how it had a radical phase, how Napoleon changed the things for France, and what were his reforms, how he fell from the power, what was the outcome of his falling from the power, and how eventually things unfolded following the end of the French Revolution. Hopefully, you will be able to comprehend everything. Thank you very much. Inshallah, we'll meet you in the next period.